The bet started because of a card game and ended because I said 9 words I had been thinking for 4 months and had no intention of saying out loud. That is not how I planned the evening. In my experience, nothing that matters ever is. My name is Cal Merritt. I was 31, a wildlife biologist for a state conservation program, which meant I spent most of my working life in places where people weren't. Wetlands, ridgelines, the kind of pine flats that smell like turpentine in August and silence in November. I was good at staying quiet when the situation required it. I was less good, by general consensus and personal experience, at saying the right thing in rooms that had other people in them. I had met Jonah Prentice at a conference 3 years earlier, and we had become the kind of friends who don't talk often but talk well when they do. Jonah hosted a dinner at his house 4 or 5 times a year. Good food, a rotating cast of people he liked, and a general understanding that the evening would eventually produce a card game that ran later than anyone planned. I went when I could. I went to this one because Jonah had said the words venison stew, and I was a simple man with straightforward priorities. The wound I carried into that evening was not dramatic in its shape, but it was specific in its weight. 3 years earlier, I had been engaged to a woman named Reese, who was warm and certain and who had known, in a way I had not understood until the conversation that ended things, that I was in love with the idea of what we could be, rather than the actual person she was. She had said this to me calmly and without cruelty, and it had taken me about 8 months to understand she was right. I had spent the subsequent 2 years alone in a way that felt earned. Not punishing myself, but paying attention in a way I should have done earlier. Learning the difference between what something looked like and what it actually was. A useful skill in field biology, harder to practice on yourself. The dinner had 9 people. I knew 5 of them and was in the process of meeting the other 4 when Jonah introduced me to the woman standing near the bookshelf who was examining his copy of a field guide to North American birds with the expression of someone who had found an old friend in an unexpected place. Her name was Petra Vance. She was 30, a landscape architect who designed public parks and river corridors, and she looked up from the field guide when Jonah said her name and gave me a look that was direct and unhurried and carried in it the specific quality of a person who decided quickly and didn't revisit the decision unnecessarily. Dark hair, a gray dress that fit her like a second opinion, and a small scar above her left eyebrow that I noticed and did not mention, and later learned was from a mountain bike incident, she described as entirely her own fault and entirely worth it. "You're the biologist," she said. "Guilty," I said. She held up the field guide. "This is wrong about the range of the painted bunting," she said. "It extends further north than they show." "I know," I said. "I complained to Jonah about it the last time I was here." She looked at me for a moment with the particular assessment of a person deciding whether to take something seriously. Then she smiled, not wide, the compact kind that meant she'd arrived somewhere, and turned back to the shelf. That was how we started. The dinner was the kind that slows down in the best way, where the food is good enough that it earns the conversation, and the conversation is good enough that it earns the second glass of wine. Jonah had put me and Petra on the same side of the table, which I registered without making anything of it, because Jonah was a man who arranged things intentionally, and I had learned not to underestimate his instincts. She designed parks, she said, which people always assumed meant planting flowers, and which actually meant reading water tables and drainage patterns and sightlines, and the way human beings moved through space when no one was directing them. You watched people, she said, and you figured out where they actually wanted to go, not where the signs told them to go, and then you built a path there. The signs were for people who weren't paying attention. That's basically field biology, I said. It's basically everything, she said. Most of the hard problems are attention problems. I thought about that for the rest of the meal. We talked about her work on a river corridor project she'd been commissioned for in a small city 2 hours north. The politics of it, the competing interests, the way you had to design for the person who was going to walk the path at 6 in the morning, and also for the teenager who was going to use the bench wrong. You couldn't design for the ideal user, she said. You had to design for the actual one. I told her about a wetland survey I'd been doing in the same general region, the way the land kept records of what it had been if you knew how to read it. Old stream beds showing through in the topography, species present that told you the soil's history before any map did. You read landscapes, she said. And you shape them, I said. She looked at me sideways. "We're the same job," she said. And the small smile was there again, the compact kind. It was after dinner, over coffee that was better than it needed to be, that she mentioned the Greenway. She designed a 2-mile river trail project in Raleigh the previous year, completed 6 months ago, just starting to show what it was going to be once the plantings matured. She was going out to check on it the following weekend. If I wanted to come, professionally, she could use an eye on the habitat value of the rain garden section. Professionally. I had gone professionally. I had spent 3 hours walking 2 miles of river trail with Petra Vance, who explained the intention behind every decision, with the specificity of someone who loved the work the way certain people love work. Not as a performance of passion, but as a genuine orientation toward the problem. She pointed out a sight line she'd engineered so that a particular bend in the river was visible from the midpoint bench. She showed me where the path curved slightly north of the direct route because there was a stand of river birch that the direct route would have required removing, and she had decided the detour was worth it. She asked me 3 questions about the rain garden plantings that were better questions than most people with credentials asked, and when I answered, she listened with her whole attention, and then told me one thing she was going to change because of what I'd said. I drove home that afternoon feeling something I had put away carefully and was not looking at directly. 4 months later, I was at Jonah's table with a card game and 9 words I had not planned to say. The living room was the comfortable kind, worn rugs, bookshelves that were actually used, a fire going because it was November, and Jonah believed in fires the way some people believe in good coffee, not as a luxury but as a minimum standard. The card game was a variation on something I'd played in college, part strategy, part bluffing, part reading the people across from you, and I was 3 rounds in before I noticed that Petra was very good at it. Not showy good, quietly good. The kind where you only realize what happened after the hand is over, and you can trace the decision back through everything she hadn't shown you. She caught me watching at some point and said, without looking up from her cards, "You're trying to figure out my tell." "You don't have one," I said. "Everyone has one," she said. "You just haven't found it yet." She was right that I was looking. She was wrong that it was about the cards. Around 9:30, the game had narrowed to 4 of us, and it was between hands, and someone had said something about poker faces, and Jonah, because Jonah, said that Petra had the best poker face he'd ever encountered in a civilian, and that no one at the table had a prayer of unsettling her. It was the kind of thing that invites a test, which Jonah knew perfectly well, because he was the one who said it while looking directly at me. Petra set down her glass with the slight smile of someone who had heard this before and wasn't concerned about it. "Go ahead," she said, looking at the table generally. "Try." Various people tried. Jonah told a story with a punchline that landed on the wrong person. Marcus, who was sitting on her other side, said something about her dress that was intended to be flirtatious and landed as vaguely medical. Someone else tried a compliment about her eyes, which she received with complete equanimity and a polite thank you that managed to be both genuine and entirely unrevealing. The room had the particular energy of people enjoying a thing they were not winning. I had not tried. I had been sitting across from her with my cards and my drink, and the particular stillness I had developed in years of field work, the kind where you stopped being a presence in the landscape and just became part of what was already there. It was a skill. It was costing me something tonight to maintain it. She looked at me across the table. "You haven't tried," she said. "No," I said. "Are you going to?" I looked at her. She looked back at me with that even, unhurried expression, the one she'd been calibrating all evening against every approach anyone had taken, and which said, plainly, that she expected more of the same. "You can't make me blush," she said. Not as a taunt, as a statement of what she believed to be fact, the way she talked about drainage patterns and painted buntings. "I don't think you have the material." Something shifted in the room. The other 3 people at the table hadn't moved, but the conversation had reduced to 2 people, and everyone could feel it. I had the material. That was the problem. I had 4 months of it. 4 months of Jonah's dinners and a shared coffee after one of them, and the Greenway walk, which she'd offered professionally, and which had been one of the better afternoons I'd had in years, and which I had filed carefully under friendship. Do not examine closely. I had the specific way she pushed her hair back when she was thinking hard. I had the way she talked about her work like it was a relationship rather than a job. I had the 3 texts she'd sent me after the Greenway walk that were professionally appropriate and that I had read in a way that was not. I had the fact that she remembered things I said, not performed remembering, actual remembering, the kind that means you were listening in a way you don't announce. I had all of that. And the bet was sitting on the table and she was looking at me like she already knew the outcome. I had not planned to say any of it. The room was quiet. The fire in Jonah's fireplace across the room made a small sound. Someone's drink was on the table. Petra was still looking at me with the expression that expected more of the same. I leaned forward slightly. Not dramatically, just enough. I said 9 words, quietly enough that the rest of the table couldn't hear them, directly to her. I think about you more than I should tell you. Silence. She did not move for a moment. Then the color came. Not the theatrical kind, the real kind. The involuntary kind that starts at the jaw and moves upward. The kind that comes not from embarrassment, but from being seen suddenly and precisely in a way you had not arranged for. Not because the words were romantic in some practiced way, because they were true, and she knew they were true, and she hadn't known until that moment that I knew she'd know. There it was. She looked down at the table. 1 breath, 2. Then she looked back up at me with an expression that was doing several things at once. The assessment was still there, but underneath it something had shifted, like a load-bearing wall that had just been asked to carry more weight, and had found, with some surprise, that it could. The room erupted, the way rooms do when something has happened that everyone witnessed and no one can quite name. Jonah said something triumphant. Marcus laughed. I did not take my eyes off Petra. She picked up her cards, set them down again. That wasn't the material I expected, she said. I know, I said. You've been sitting on that. For a while, I said. She looked at me for a long moment with an expression that was recalibrating, the way a person recalibrates when the map they've been using turns out to describe different terrain than the ground they're standing on. Not alarmed. Recalibrating. I need some air, she said, to no one in particular, and stood up. I gave it 2 minutes. Then I followed. She was on Jonah's back porch, leaning on the railing, her back to the door. The night was cold and clear, and the yard beyond the railing was dark except for the light coming through from the kitchen window, and she had her arms crossed not against the cold but in the way people cross their arms when they're thinking. I came out and stood next to her, not too close. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The cold was the kind that clarifies things. You could hear the neighborhood, distant traffic, somewhere a dog. I had been in enough field environments to know that silence wasn't the absence of information. It was usually the most information. You've been sitting on something, she said finally. Not a question. Yes, I said. For 4 months, at least, I said. She was quiet again. When she finally spoke, her voice had the particular evenness of someone choosing each word before she released it. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it as what it is, and not as something else. Okay, I said. I don't do this lightly, she said. Whatever this is, I don't open quickly. I've had 2 relationships in the last 6 years, and I ended both of them because I am apparently the kind of person who takes longer than most to understand what she actually wants. And by the time I understand it, the other person has gotten tired of waiting, and I can't blame them for that. She looked out at the yard. So what you said in there, it landed on me in a way I wasn't ready for. Not badly. Just, I need a minute to figure out what I'm doing with it. I said nothing. I looked at the dark yard. A minute was the most reasonable thing she could have asked for, given that I had said the thing in front of 7 people at a card table. I'm not good at being caught off guard, she said. I know, I said. I've watched you not be caught off guard all evening. She made a sound that was almost a laugh and wasn't quite. And then you caught me anyway. I didn't plan it, I said, for the record. What were you planning? I thought about it. To drive home, I said, to think about it on the drive. To probably call Jonah next week and figure out whether I'd read the situation wrong for 4 months or correctly for 4 months, and then do something reasonable about it. She turned to look at me then, with the assessment back and something underneath it that was newer. And instead, she bet me I didn't have the material, I said. She was wrong about that, Petra said. You were, I said. You're wrong about things sometimes. She looked at me for a long moment. That's an interesting thing to say to a person you're trying to impress. I'm not trying to impress you, I said. I'm trying to be accurate. Something passed across her face that I didn't have a name for yet but was learning. like a woman who had just been offered something she'd been careful not to want too specifically, and was deciding whether the careful had been worth it. "Okay," she said. Then accurately, I went home after the Greenway walk and walked the south section again the next morning, not to check anything, just because I'd been happy there and I wanted to be in the place where that had happened. She said it plainly, with the matter-of-factness she applied to all true things. Something in my chest that had been making neutral, responsible decisions about Petra Vance for 4 months simply stopped making them. "I should have said something on the Greenway," I said. "Probably," she said. "But then we wouldn't have the card game story. Is that a consolation?" "It's an excellent story," she said. "I'm going to tell it for years." "Who are you going to tell it to?" She held my gaze for a moment, with that assessment, and then she said, "I'll start with Jonah, since he caused it, and then probably anyone who asks how we met." The night air was cold and the yard was dark, and I stood on Jonah's back porch, understanding exactly what she'd just said, and feeling something I had not felt in 3 years, which was the particular certainty of a person who has found the right terrain and recognized it. "We should go back in," she said. "Yeah," I said. "I don't think any of them are going to let us forget this." "Good," she said, and she was already smiling when she said it. "I don't want to forget it either." We went back in. The room had achieved a particular quality of smug satisfaction that I found I didn't mind at all. Jonah refilled my glass without being asked, and gave me a look that said he had orchestrated this and wanted credit, which he had, and he would get it. The card game resumed. Petra played the next hand with one of the highest bluffs I'd seen all night, and won, and glanced at me across the table when she turned the cards over, and I think that was the moment I understood, fully and without hedging, where this was going. We left around midnight. I walked her to her car, she stood with her keys in her hand and said, "I'll text you." "Logistics?" I said. She gave me a look. "Saturday," she said, "if you want. There's a section of the river trail I haven't shown you." "I want," I said. She got in the car. She drove away. I stood in Jonah's driveway in the November cold for longer than was strictly necessary, which I have since thought about when my students asked me, during a unit on animal behavior, about the difference between instinct and intention. Sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes the instinct is the most intentional you've ever been. You just don't have the language for it until you hear yourself say the words. The river trail was a Saturday in November, then a Sunday in December, then a pattern that stopped needing names. Petra designed a small pocket park near my office building the following spring, and I consulted, professionally, on the habitat considerations for the rain garden along the north edge, and we made that take 3 meetings longer than it needed to because neither of us was in any hurry. I attended the park's opening event and brought field notes that were only partly about birds. She gave a short speech to the parks department and caught my eye once from the podium, which is not something I will be describing in detail here, except to say that it went into the same drawer I keep the important things. She told the card game story at our first dinner with her parents. Her mother cried a little. Her father, who was a man of few words and precise ones, looked at me across the table and said, "9 words." "9 words," I said. He nodded. "Economy of expression," he said. "Good instinct. I liked him immediately. What would you have done if you'd been sitting on something for 4 months and someone looked at you across a table and said, plainly, that you didn't have what it took? And has anyone ever said the thing to you, the quiet, precise, unexpected thing, that made you understand the next part of your life was going to be different? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one got you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.